to build the brand and build yourself. How do you go with accepting that information and making the change?
Mm. Well, first of all, I want to say that there's been a real mindset shift in me around change. So, years ago, I used to think about the fact that I would one day get the offering, on my website, Total Balance, I'd get the offering right, in inverted commas, I'd work it out. And then somewhere in the last, probably really 10 years, I started to realize that it's actually not about getting it right. It is about evolution. It's about continuing to shape it and mold it to fit with who I am now. And I'm not going to stay the same. I'm always learning. And being brave enough to then listen to whatever's coming in. And, it might be from somebody, like in that case it was Meg, or from, my intuition. And just moving in that direction. So, yeah, I recognise that it's an evolution. It's not ever going to be set in stone, the offering. And I do keep changing things. You often look at my website and see that something's different. And that actually feels really exciting now. And that's part of probably the recognition that I have, that I'm quite creative, in that I can just tune in and think of something that I want to do next and, hopefully create that and make it happen.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think mindfulness and coaching, it's a moving market. It's constantly evolving now. It's becoming, more and more popular. So I think you've got to move with it as well, because, there's a new tool or a new way to do things. And, we could talk a little bit about the stuff that you're doing around self-compassion, which is becoming a lot more popular, and for good reason. But if you're sort of stuck in a certain way, or a certain way that you run your meditations, and you don't do self-compassion, or you don't do loving kindness, and you put the barriers up, then you cut yourself off from a potential audience, but also from the ability for you to grow as a person as well.
Yeah, look, the self-compassion stuff is just, it's content that I absolutely love, and I'm actually heading up to Queensland this weekend to do a bit more training in that. I really feel as though this is something that's just so needed.
Yeah.
So, yes, whatever I'm learning about, I always want to share. And you're right, I mean, the landscape's changing all the time. And the great thing is that there's so much research now. So, back when I started, there wasn't a lot of research to draw on to be able to tell people this really does work. It's not just us imagining that it works as anecdotal, as anecdotal evidence says now, empirical evidence that says it really works.
Yeah.
Which I think for a lot of people, that science has made a big difference in terms of how they receive mindfulness. And the same thing's happening with self-compassion. There's lots of research being done. In fact, a couple of years ago, I went to a conference in Sydney, which was the Mindful Leadership Conference, which was run by a Wake Up Group.
Yep.
Who are on a bit of a sabbatical at the moment while Jono's over in the States.
Yeah.
Sounds true. But at that conference, there were researchers from Harvard and Stanford and Berkeley, and lots of discussion about compassion and self-compassion in leadership. And, I feel like it's just the beginning of that conversation. It's really positive.
Yeah, well, I know I just listened to the ebook Altered Traits, which sort of took a lot of the research from, I think it was Dan Goldman, and just sort of spoke about it in real terms, like it's just how it is. And self-compassion and loving kindness was one of those ones that they've researched that, really does bring a greater sense of equanimity to the moment, and it's actually been proven really strongly as a real tool.
Well, yeah, there's lots of evidence that says that loving kindness is one of the most beneficial, particularly for people suffering from anxiety.
Yeah, and I know personally, for me, being a man, like I think that a way to get that to more men, to be able to create a practice around that's really important. So they've got the ability to show it and appreciate it and use it, rather than sort of bottling everything up.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. It's so important to see men role modelling this stuff. I think, again, it's being more broadly embraced. We've still got a way to go, don't we? But, you will see that men are comfortable to talk about meditation and even, mental health just in general, which I think is such a positive thing.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so Kate, we got you. You've got the business, and which I loved, and you're up and going. Now, the next bit where we sort of met was when you're really in that early stages of books and writing.
Yeah.
Can you give us an overview of how that came about and what the first 12 months of that process was like for you to take on books and take on being an author?
Yeah, sure. So I think the only thing that I've ever known in my life about what I would do when I grew up was that I wanted to write. So I've always adored books and loved writing and knew that one day I would want to write a book, and I had no idea what it would be about. So right from the very beginning of my business, I thought one day I'll write a book. And I spent a long time sort of umming and ahhing about what the book would. I knew what the content would be. Mostly, I've got so many journals that are full of, it'll be about this and it'll be about that. They're all the things that I've written about. But funnily enough, I needed to have a title. I needed to kind of have the concept to sit the rest of the work around. And it took me forever to come up with a title. And one day it just came to me, just out of nowhere. And so that first book is called Believe in Yourself and Do What You Love. And it came, and I didn't doubt it at all. I felt complete confidence with it. And I was catching up with a friend of mine who works in advertising for Brecky, and I said to him, "What do you think of this title?" And he said, "I absolutely love it. You should go for it." And so I think that was about 2013.
Yep.
Around about maybe 6 years earlier, I had been to an event. There's a magazine called Dumbo Feather, which is a beautiful magazine. It talks about sort of real life stories and often people who are making some significant change in the world. And the girl who founded that was a girl called Kate Beezer, and she had an event in Flinders Lane with a fairly small group of people just talking about her work and how she'd come to found the magazine. And I went along to that. And when I was there, I met a guy called Martin Hughes, who was then, I think, the editor of The Big Issue. And I chased him up afterwards, and we had a coffee, and we kept on catching up, maybe once every 6 months. And I was saying to him, I want to write a book one day. And he'd written a book called The Slow Guide to Melbourne. And sometime after that, he became the editor at a small publishing house called Affirm Press. And when I finally hit on this, having an idea for what the book would be, I gave him a call and I said, "Look, would you have time to have a coffee?" And he said to me, "Yeah, come into the office and we'll have a meeting." And he said, "I'll invite our sales director as well." And I thought, "Oh, that sounds pretty promising." But I was calling him to find out about self-publishing because I never imagined for a minute that I'd get a publishing deal. And I thought, I might just put together a book proposal to make me look like I'm serious. And so I did this quite long and intense book proposal. You can download a template online for a book proposal, and it's a fair bit of research, but I did it, and I felt like this was coming together really well, and I felt really proud of what I'd put into the book proposal. And was heading in to have a meeting with these guys. This is funny, I haven't thought about this story for ages. I was heading in to have a meeting with them on the Monday. And on the Saturday, a lovely friend of mine called me, and she'd just come back from being overseas, and she'd had her handbag stolen, and she was a bit upset. And I dropped over to her house and just to have a coffee, and sitting underneath her coffee table was a book by a guy called Paul Arden called It's Not How Good You Are, It's How Good You Want to Be. And I said, "Oh, I can't believe you've got that book sitting there. I've been thinking about my book and thinking that I want to make it a small book so it's really accessible," which is what Paul's book was. And anyway, I kind of dismissed the idea and went into the office on the Monday to meet with these guys with my book proposal. And I had this idea of a little book in the back of my mind and started talking to them about the book. And Martin, the editor, said to me, "You wouldn't consider making it a little book, would you?" And I said, "Well, funny you should say that. I've been thinking about it." And he said, "Let me just go and grab one and show you as an example." And he came back into the room with that same book. It's How Good You Are, It's How Good You Want to Be. It's not how good you are, it's how good you want to be. And I thought, well, there's a sign if ever there was one.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. And they offered me a contract, and yeah, it's kind of like the rest is history, really, because it just took off.
Well, it's one thing, Kate, and I think this is like for anyone that's listening or whatever, the fact that, you know, you put something that you want out there to enough people that you just speak, you know, not sort of preaching, but really clear about that you'd like to write a book and this is what you're about. And when you start to put those things into the universe in the right way with real intent, that you'd be surprised in how often they can come to life and you meet the right person that can actually take that information and use it. And all, you know, exactly the story you're talking about is about the right timing of things working for you. So I think that's an amazing story for people to learn from.
Yeah, and look, you know, it's funny, Luke, I love science and I've always looked for the evidence for everything. You know, give me the data and I'll believe it. I didn't have the science with meditation, but I really believed it, but I was desperately yearning for the science. This is back when I started. Yeah. And I don't have the science for this idea of synchronicity, although, you know, was it Albert Einstein who talked about it?
I think it was, yeah.
But I have had that experience in my life so many times that I can't deny there's some truth in it. You know, there have been some incredible miracles in my life that I feel hugely grateful for. And you're right, you know, just putting a bit of energy out there in the world about things can create some change in your life that is sort of beyond what you expect.
Yeah, and it's even with the science behind it, Kat, I think like when you coach someone, it's about them getting really clear about what they want and how they can tell that story or paint that picture so they can actually take next steps. But it's similar. It's like just getting really clear and understanding of what's important to you or what you want and how you want that to look. Just makes it so much simpler to get it. If you've got a sort of a fuzzy idea, you're going to get a fuzzy outcome. So I think that's exactly what the book was sounding like for you. And then it wasn't just one book. I think it's 3 books now that you've written.
Yeah, 4 actually.
4 now.
Yeah, and I'm in the process of writing the 5th.
Are they getting longer, or are you staying with that short format?
This new one will be a bit longer. It's still. I'm really clear that the work that I do is about gathering lots of information. So I love reading and I love researching, but what I like to do is distill that into sort of bite-sized pieces for people. So just making a whole lot of different things accessible. So lots of the content in the books is content that I've researched. So it'll still be relatively short, but a little bit longer than the previous ones.
Okay. And what's the writing process? Are you getting more efficient at that, or what's that look like for you now in terms of, you know, how long it takes for you to research to get it to pen to paper to get it to publish?
Yeah. In this sense, I'm actually a real creative. It's a messy process. Okay. It's not linear, and I'm not structured at all. It's all a bit mad. I think I am getting better, and as you know, we've shifted house. We moved out of town a year ago, and one of the things that I've discovered since being here, our house has a really strong connection to nature, and I've always known that nature is my spiritual practice, being in nature. So that is very sort of healing for me in its own way, or, you know, it certainly nourishes my creativity, and I'm finding that I'm writing much more easily or much more readily here. So it's a joy being here and writing. But the process is pretty much ad hoc. So I'll brainstorm the chapter ideas at the beginning of the process and just check them off with the publisher. And then I don't write it from cover to cover. I'll just sort of, again, quite intuitively think about what is it that I want to write about today, or, you know, something might pop into my world and I think, oh, that's really appropriate for that chapter. So the book kind of, you know, you hear a lot of writers say this, the book kind of writes itself. And I might start with a list of chapter headings, but then other things come in, and even right down to the last edit, you know, something will come in and I'll think, oh, that really needs to be included, and that'll get put in there. I've discovered that I write really well on planes. So